Hello, everyone. I think we've just started the broadcast. Just checking here. All right, great. My name is Adam Sturman. I'm the webmaster and video editor for Promethean Action. Welcome to our first ever live broadcast here with Susan and Barbara. So let's give everyone a few minutes to get in here. Do me a favor and let me know in the chat what part of the world you're from. I see people already are saying we're seeing good day from Tasmania, good day from Brussels, British Columbia, grading from Texas. Thank you, Divine Matrix. I see you. Fish Creek, Wisconsin, buzzy. Thank you, Bill, for the kind words. All right, we already have such a great community here already. All right, so this is the way it's going to work. The show is going to be very simple. It's mostly going to be us taking your questions and answers. And the way that I'm going to be presenting the questions today, we're going to be prioritizing our paid customers. So the order in which we're going to be going through the questions is literally the order in which we got them. And wow, okay. I don't know if Barbara or Susan are looking at the chat, but literally we have representation from all over the country and the world. I see friends. I'm coming to you from Virginia. Barbara and I are coming to you from Virginia. Susan's coming in from Michigan. Wow. New Jersey. Yeah, I hear you. Okay, so it's very simple. We're going to be taking questions. We're going to be starting with just some quick introductions about our backgrounds so you get a better sense of who we are. And so I guess for that, I'll begin with my own story first. Oops, wrong one. All right, so my name is Adam Sturman. I grew up in Philadelphia. I was born in 1981. 1981 is the first millennial year. And I went to Central High School, which is actually a pretty cool historical thing because Central High School in Philadelphia wasn't the nation's first public high school. I don't think it was that, but it was still founded by Benjamin Franklin's great-grandson. And I'm very lucky to have graduated, seriously. The only reason why I did is because my teachers liked me. And even though I was a terrible student, I've always had a lifelong passion for knowledge. So I still spend my days studying mathematics, studying science, learning new things about computers, studying video editing. So everything I know is pretty much self-taught and self-motivated. Okay. So my life really changed. I got into the political world starting after September 11th, right? I was first millennial generation, 19 years old at the time. So everyone is literally thinking, every young person at that time was thinking, am I going to war? Literally, everyone was thinking that. And so the way I got involved directly in politics is that my girlfriend at the time was going to college. And she met some organizers on campus, which ultimately led to me coming to meetings. And in February 2002, after attending a national political conference, I joined as a full-time political organizer. So I was organizing on campuses across the East Coast. I did street activism in Philadelphia, New York City, Boston, and most importantly, Washington, D.C. Tons of stuff in Washington, D.C. We organized some protests. And this is in the early 2000s, really, before we even had social media. Okay. So in 2007 is when my position got a little bit of an upgrade. So instead of being just a street organizer, I was able to join the website team, which I was definitely one of the leads on for that. And that's also when I started getting more involved in video production. My gift personally from the creator was being really good with computers, but it was in 2007 is when I learned how to took my feet, started stepping into the world of digital video. Now, here's the challenge. In 2008, here was the problem. Obama is literally like the worst president ever, right? And at the time, we made our opposition clear. Does anyone here remember the Obama stash? Let me know if you remember seeing the Obama stash around 2008, 2009, right? We were actually responsible for that. All right, fast forward. 2009, I became Lyndon LaRouche's personal videographer. I had a front seat to his political mind. I captured, if you saw any video recorded of Lyndon after about 2009, that was probably me behind the camera. Okay, but in 2016, there was a shift, right? Lyndon started, his old man, his health started declining. He was writing less. He was making less public appearances, and he ultimately moved to Germany. So this is in a period about 2009 to about 2016. Okay. For me, this is a big change in my life because this is the time when Donald Trump came onto the scene, right? And Lyndon LaRouche and Donald Trump are very different people, completely different backgrounds. But the one thing I will say is they had an unbelievable love for the United States, period. An unshakable love, right? That's why everyone loves Trump. And the second thing is Trump has the absolute strongest commanding leadership. He has a larger than life personality. The same thing, the same reason it drove Lyndon LaRouche to run for president all those times. Okay, Donald Trump has that same massive universal personality, and he also puts the United States first. Okay, so then 2020 comes along with another big change point for us. We saw the election got stolen. I got pushed off of social media, off of Facebook, which is the platform that I was working to kind of build up. So it was the Friday of January 6th, right? That Friday, I remember I was at the bar with my friends, 6 p.m. I got this email from Facebook saying that my account was basically deleted. And it was because I posted hashtag stop the steal. That was the first hashtag that was ever banned on Facebook. I used that hashtag on multiple of our social media pages, and that Friday I was banned from Facebook. So I'm not even on Facebook anymore. Finally, 2024 is when Promethean Action and PAC were created. Our goal is to back Trump and reclaim the United States. So that's just a quick introduction about myself. Thank you very much. All right. Now I'm going to bring Barbara Boyd on, and she's going to just go through a quick background of her history. Here we go, Barbara.
Okay, as opposed to Adam, I'm a boomer. I was born in the town which built Hoover Dam, and my dad was a teacher and a football coach in that particular town. He taught me to question virtually everything, and we debated everything. Now, he quit teaching, he told me, because John Dewey ruined education. And I really followed up on that by thinking about why he did that. Later on, he managed an airport where he tried valiantly to stop the mob from skimming slot machine revenues. And that was kind of a bad choice, as we ended up having to leave the state when I was 15. And after a stop in Denver, we ended up on Guam, which is where I graduated from high school. I went to UC Berkeley in 1968 for what was supposed to be my college education. Obviously, that was the time when there were riots every single week, and the counterculture was born there. I studied philosophy, or tried to. I loved Plato, and I hated the logical positivists and empiricists who dominated the department at Berkeley. So I had a hard time, and I wandered into a bookstore one day where they had a pamphlet by Lyndon LaRouche called The New Left, Local Control, and Fascism. And that rang so true to me that I set out, because I said to myself, I got to find this guy. So I moved to New York, and I joined LaRouche and his friends in 1974. I met and married my wonderful husband of 49 years there. And my whole history was being under constant attack by one enemy after another because of what we were doing. The Communist Party, the FBI, the highest levels of the Eastern establishment, after we exposed them all, because the idea of LaRouche was to build an intelligence agency which was really better than the CIA. I worked in the legal department to defend our organization, and to make money, I worked at some of the biggest New York law firms as a paralegal. When we moved to Virginia in 1985 because of Lyndon LaRouche's work with Reagan's National Security Council. In 1983 through 1986, our organization grew in both political influence and size, and so did the attacks. Government records show that Henry Kissinger and the establishment figures on the president's Foreign Advisory Board were behind it. We were massively defamed in the media, with LaRouche made out to be a new Hitler, just like Donald Trump. The declassified versions of those records show the attack was instigated by British intelligence with collaboration from George H.W. Bush's CIA. They said our politics were propitious to quote unquote Soviet influences, just like Russiagate today. From 1986 to 2000, I was either in a courtroom, in criminal trials, or writing appeals to get people out of jail. So when Russiagate happened, I knew immediately that Trump was threatening the same apparatus that LaRouche threatened. Even Robert Mueller, the prosecutor, was the very same one who prosecuted LaRouche in Boston. As Adam points out, LaRouche and Trump are very, very different, but have a similar creative drive, genius, and love for this country. Our experience and the wealth of knowledge gained in all the years in this fight to rescue our nation can, I think, make a decisive contribution to winning it. Now, beginning in 2004, 2005, I worked closely with Lyndon LaRouche as the treasurer of his political action committee, LaRouche PAC. The PAC was the center of a new youth movement schooled in the fundamentals of science, classical music, and literature and history. And I began writing much more regularly then, focused on what many call the deep state today, the people I had been in hand-to-hand combat with for years, literally. So that's more or less my story. It brings us up to today. People are very interested in what we have to say about Trump's campaign to take down the British Empire. That's what I'm most dedicated to.
Thank you, Barbara. If you're joining us now, my name is Adam. I'm the webmaster and video editor for Promethean Action. We're starting by first just doing some introductions. I did a 5-minute introduction. We just heard from Barbara Boyd. Now we're going to hear from Susan Kokinda. So let me load up your slides here. All right, take it away.
All right. Hi, everybody. I think the best way to describe me is actually me standing in front of my Ford truck, because I am a product of American industrial might. My parents met during World War II building Liberator bombers at World War I at the famous Willow Run plant. And my father worked for the Ford Motor Company all of his life. We settled in an area of Detroit called Downriver, because it's down the Detroit River from Detroit, which is a blue-collar, heavily manufacturing area even to this day. And my early years were shaped by, I think, the two existential crises that hit most of my generation. Number one, the Cuban Missile Crisis, and number two, the assassination of President Kennedy in November of 1963. But that got kind of put on steroids for me, because in 1968, I was working for Robert F. Kennedy Sr. as a volunteer in his campaign in California. I was in San Francisco when he was assassinated in Los Angeles. And again, that just intensified the kind of existential crisis that many people in our generation were having, that there was something very wrong with our country and we didn't have a handle on what it was. But I was fortunate when I was still a student at the University of Michigan, where I barely escaped with my brain, to run into somebody putting forward Lyndon LaRouche's ideas. And I started studying them, paying attention to them. And in early 1971, he was talking about a coming financial crisis. Nobody else was, but he was. And of course, lo and behold, on August 15th, 1971, Nixon ended the Bretton Woods system, ended the floating exchange rate system. And I said to myself, this guy knows what he's talking about. I'm going to go find out more. So I moved to New York so that I could take his entire class series then. But I was I had a kind of unusual experience in our organization subsequently, because my husband and I were sent to Washington, D.C. in 1974, where we ultimately moved with the purpose initially of trying to stop Watergate. Because LaRouche understood that despite some differences we had with Nixon's policies, this was a coup, and we said it was a CIA coup. I think in subsequent years, we probably got a little deeper in terms of the British hand in it, but we saw it then. And even though we had a very kind of surface picture of what was behind this, it rang true enough that we were meeting with congressmen, senators. In fact, at one point, we met with Nixon's lawyer, who was probably a snake, in the White House because he wanted to know what we knew. And that launched our activity in Washington, D.C., where we were for about 10 years, testifying in front of congressional committees, meeting with congressmen and senators. And of course, that changed. There was a big upshift when Ronald Reagan came in, because we could see the potential for LaRouche's policies on economics and strategic policy to be adopted. But of course, Reagan was almost assassinated just 3 months into his administration. And as a result of that, a lot of policies got put on hold, and a lot of them really never came back to life. But the one that did was the Strategic Defense Initiative. And Mr. LaRouche worked directly with Ronald Reagan to bring the SDI to the fore. This is a picture of our movement on the steps of Capitol Hill. I'm down in the lower right-hand corner with tens of thousands, maybe it was hundreds of thousands of petition signatures for President Reagan to go ahead with the Strategic Defense Initiative. During those years in Washington, D.C., I, like Barbara, am a lover of Plato. I immersed myself in all of Plato's dialogues. I've read them many times and have done many classes on them. But I ultimately gravitated back to Michigan, where my heart was, and moved back in 2017 to really propagate President Trump's policies throughout the state. By 2023, when Trump had put forward his Agenda 47 policies, I gave forums, I set up tables, I was all over the state, active in the MAGA movement and in the Republican Party to make sure that the Michigan Republican Party increasingly became the party of Donald Trump. Because I saw that the industrial policies which had shaped my life were what Trump was trying to bring back to life. Because of my activity in the party, I was fortunate to be elected as a delegate to the Milwaukee Convention in 2024 and had the awesome experience of seeing the first public appearance of Donald Trump in the balcony behind me just a couple of days after he was almost assassinated. My husband and I have remained active in Michigan. My husband ran for state representative in our district and is probably going to run again. And with the 2024 elections, I decided to stay active in the party. This is me with Brian Panabaker, founder of Auto Workers for Trump, where I threw my hat in the ring to run as vice chair for coalitions of the Michigan Republican Party, and I did win. And what I've been doing since then is speaking throughout the state on the reality of what the economic transformation which Trump is carrying out. So that's where some of my time is now spent, and the rest of it is what you see me doing on YouTube.
Thank you very much, Susan. If you're just joining us for the first time, my name's Adam, webmaster and video editor, joined by Susan and Barbara. Okay, now we're going to enter the question and answer session. And I just want to let everyone know that I did get every single one of your questions and comments, even the ones that people left this morning when I sent out the email notification. Right, people immediately started sending in more questions. We're not going to be able to answer them all. And the questions, the way that I'm going to be reviewing them is the order in which we receive them, and we're putting our paid subscribers first. Okay, and I just want to address something again that came up in the chat. I think it's important to say. Somebody in the chat says, what's your relationship to Lyndon's widow? And I just want to say again that we have no association with Helga Zeppler-Rouche or any of her associated entities. We are 100% separate and independent from them. So I just wanted to say that again, actually on the broadcast, because I know not everyone's in this chat. All right, so let me just pull up the first question here. The first question gets right into it. And I don't know who wants to take this, Barbara or Susan, who wants to take it first. Question, Federal Reserve, is there a plan to abolish it? Thank you, Mark.
Well, go ahead, Barbara.
Go ahead, Susan.
All right, I'll start. I don't know if there's a plan. I think what we see with the Trump administration really across the board, whether it's Scott Bessent, whether it's Russ Vought, J.D. Vance, and others, the smackdown which they have initiated with the Federal Reserve, I think is a process of them drawing the American population into an absolutely necessary public discussion, which is the precondition for doing anything to get rid of the Fed. I mean, probably most of the people on this in this discussion have an understanding of the problem of the Fed, but I think most of you will also recognize that not necessarily the average American, and perhaps not even the average MAGA supporter, understands that the Federal Reserve is an independent entity and is fundamentally unconstitutional from the standpoint of what actually founded the United States. So to take on an institution which was imposed upon us and which has really been protected by the full intelligence services of the United States and the British for over 100 years is no small task. So I think the first thing that this administration has to do and is doing is bring the general population up to snuff in terms of the problems of the Fed, the fact that it is independent, the fact that it operates on the basis of principles which are antithetical to an actual industrial policy. So my sense is that's what Trump is doing right now, what his cabinet officers are doing, as Scott Bessent recently called into question. You know, we have to re-examine the mission of the Fed, and is it fulfilling its mission? There's a lot of backroom chatter in terms of how you might reshape the Fed in a way that it would be less obstructive to Trump. Of course, Trump is going to have the opportunity to choose a new chairman next year. And I have no doubt that he's going to choose somebody who is going to be much more in keeping with using the Fed as an ally for rebuilding our industrial economy. But that's going to be a very interesting marker, because to abolish the Fed, you're going to have Congress. And I think watching the debate on the new Fed chairman next year is going to be very important, because it's going to give us a sense of how far we'll be able to actually push necessary changes in the Fed. Personally, I don't think it's going to happen in Trump's term, but I think we have to lay the basis for it in the future. That's my take on it. Barbara, go ahead.
I think there's very interesting stuff going on. I think Susan's correct, is that they want you, the citizens, to fully understand the problem here, which is how do we get money into the productive side of the economy, as opposed to it sitting in the Fed and drawing interest, and basically the Fed itself going somewhat bankrupt. They're running a $100 billion deficit at this point, because the fundamental problem is that we've had this speculative economy since 1971, and the Fed has been the champion of that. It has basically not been the champion of getting money to Main Street, which is the thing that Scott Bessent keeps emphasizing. And what he's trying to do is get more banks set up that actually lend into the real economy, which the Fed is not doing at this point at all, or facilitating at all. So I think that it's a big battle, because we have to actually fund the American system economics that Trump is talking about. And they're finding ways to actually get this done, in my view, by actually subverting the major New York banks, which actually run the Fed at this point, from New York and London. It's not a independent agency. It's actually run by the biggest banks in the country, namely the New York Fed is what runs things. So that's the battle. And people are wedded to the Fed in Congress because it absolves them of their constitutional responsibility to actually come up with productive ways to run the economy, which is, really Congress's role, which is why the Fed is unconstitutional. So it's a battle. I think it's opened up, but I don't think there's a plan we're going to do X, Y, Z, and W to abolish it. I think they're trying every kind of way possible to get you engaged in thinking about the real fight here in terms of, what's a productive investment and how do we get money into those. So that's what I basically think is going on.
Thank you very much, Barbara and Susan. I'd just like to give a quick shout out first to Grace Reeves, I believe from the UK, gave us a $50 super chat. Also, thank you to Beverly Adams. And I think we have a friend, Orange, just donated $20. Thank you very much, guys. All right, so next question. Now, this question I had to toe down a lot. And I'm sure a lot of you are going to resonate with this person, and I think we have to address it because this is a definite subtext unfortunately, in the Republican and the right-wing side of politics. So I'm going to read this out loud because it's a little bit hard to see. I am stunned at what I've learned from Promethean action. Not even 1% of Americans know any of this, which brings me to my question. What makes you think America even stands a snowball's chance in hell of ever fighting these globalist communists? Trump is only one man fighting the whole world. You remark, Trump is using our Constitution to fight for America's sovereignty. These people have trampled on the Constitution for the last 75 years. At 72 years old, I've maintained for the last 40 years now that blank. Okay. I blanked it out because I don't want YouTube to get any funny ideas here, but this person is suggesting a violent solution. So at the last years, I've maintained for 72, I've maintained for the last 40 years now that essentially violence is the only solution, is the only way to salvage whatever is left of our republic. Sincerely, Jay of Alaska. And again, we don't support this in any way, but I think we still have to address this kind of subtext that's very alive inside parts of the Trump network.
Susan, you want to start, or I can?
I was going to suggest you do.
Okay, all right. Look, obviously the situation we've been through has bred in many, many people a level of cultural pessimism. That is the design of what they've tried to bring the population through, where you basically say, okay, I'm giving up. I don't see any solution, but some kind of apocalyptic way of dealing with things. We have a sign which we use all the time when we go out into the population, which says Donald can't do it alone. That's true. All right. It requires citizens just like this person who knows something about this to actually get off the couch and take on the enormous responsibility of changing things. And things are changing drastically. Just look at Susan's midweek. All right. The EU, the globalist conspiracy of all globalist conspiracies, yielded to the United States and is now basically opening up its entire bloc to trade for us for the first time. Their responses are all somewhat subservient to the ideas of national sovereignty, which is at the center of the Trump movement, and towards actually sending money into productive investment. unleashing a technological renaissance, which is what's being done by Trump right now. So the point is that the ideas which he is basically using, the American system of political economy, can triumph over all of this. We did it once before in our revolution. We did it once before in the Civil War. So you're right. Very often it's required a war, a world war, to actually get these changes. But they're happening right now simply by the force of one man's personality and the power of the United States. And that's what I think people have to take in and recognize, that there's been huge progress in cleaning up the mess in Washington. There's been huge progress in setting an economic agenda which can actually cure all of this. And the answer is not pessimism. You have to be driven by the optimism of the American spirit, which is what Trump has embraced. And, you know, basically, as he said to Davos when he went there and stared him right in the face, he said, the world belongs to the optimists, not the pessimists. So I think you have to take that in. You have to think of all the great periods of history, like the Renaissance, when actually change came about by an intellectual and cultural revolution, seeking the best ideas for all of humanity. So I'll leave my answer at that.
Well, I'll just add, look, my experience is that when somebody is ready to throw in the towel in terms of the United States, then 99 times out of 100, they're not organizing. Because if you're out there organizing, as Barbara and I have been for over 50 years and Adam for a couple of decades, you've seen the change in the American population. They have changed dramatically since Donald Trump went down the escalator. They changed even more dramatically after the events of 2021, and J6. They changed dramatically during the pandemic. Each atrocity thrown at us by the oligarchy, because we've had leadership, has awakened broader and broader layers of the American population to put themselves out on the battlefield. The number of people that I encounter when I'm out organizing, number of people who become delegates in the Michigan Republican Party who have said to me, I was never political until X, right? So the American population is changing in a dramatic way. So again, one of the things that I think breeds pessimism is people who spend too much time in front of their computers and not enough time out there talking to the American people. The second thing that breeds it is people don't understand the real fight. They think it's a fight against big government or against communism or something like that. And as Barbara and I have tried to do in all of our updates, is give people a deeper sense of the power of American exceptionalism, what our founding fathers created, and why for the first time in human history, you actually had a government which was organized around the essential nature of man, which is that we're above the beasts and we're put here to continue the Creator's activity. That is an enormous power, which only a few of our presidents have understood and which Donald Trump understands. So if you fall prey to either one of those problems, i.e. you're not organizing or you don't know the background, the actual nature of the fight, then you're susceptible to the psyops of the enemy, who basically say, surrender, soldier boy, we've lost.
All right. Thank you, Barbara and Sousa, for addressing that pessimistic question. And there is still tons of this destructive pessimism that exists inside the MAG movement, the wider MAG movement. Again, I have to say thank you. Thank you, Beverly. Thank you, Jennifer, DFF1234, Carol, PSA, K Trimbach, LJBAS Skull, James, thank you. Thank you for your donations. It really means a lot. Okay, this is obviously we have so many questions here. We're already over 30 minutes. We're closing in less than 30 minutes for the show, so I'm going to try and pick it up here a little bit. Okay, I want to bring up something is that you'll notice that Barbara, that Susan under her thing, it says the label under her says Promethean Action. And Barbara says Promethean PAC. And I just want to go through the difference, I want to have a quick discussion about why we have Promethean Action and Promethean PAC. Especially if you're not from the United States and you don't know the finer point of the FEC and our federal election policies, I'll just go through a quick discussion, and then Barbara actually Barbara should have put treasurer of Promethean PAC. Okay, so Barbara is technically treasurer of Promethean PAC. Okay, the difference is that by the United States federal campaign law, Promethean Action, which is I guess the organization's kind of addressing you right now, we can't directly act on an election in the United States. We can talk about policy. We can organize people from across the planet for these ideas. We can take Promethean Action, can take donations from all over the world, right? We're getting donations from all over the world. We have subscribers to our newsletter from all over the world, okay? But Promethean PAC, which we haven't really been raising money for, can actually spend money, like do get out the vote campaigns for a candidate. That's something that Promethean PAC can do that Promethean Action can't. Another thing Promethean PAC can do that Promethean Action can is do things like run campaign ads for or against a candidate. So let's say there's a race in a particular area where we know we want to throw down or help or fight against a particular candidate. Promethean Action can't really do that. Only Promethean PAC can. So I'm going to throw a link up here on the screen. Guys, thank you so much for supporting Promethean Action. Like, we're getting to the level of funding now where we can begin to do shows like this more frequently. But the next thing I need to ask is, can we get some love for Promethean PAC? All right, let me just pull that up here. So, Barbara, so if you can, could you please go, the link there is prom.ac/YTPAC. It doesn't matter, it's case insensitive. And if you want to scan the QR code, you can scan the QR code. Again, this is only for American citizens because we're trying to fundraise for the Political Action Committee and not for Promethean Action, which is a different kind of organization. Barbara, can you say a few things about this?
Sure. And we're now focused on 2026. That's really going to determine whether this revolution we're in right now continues or not. And what we found by being on the ground in several states is that very few people in the Republican Party actually understand what Trump's policies and programs are, particularly around economics. You can see how quick the Democrats are to seize on that by seizing on Scott Besant's statement from yesterday, which he explained this idea of expanding out these baby accounts, which are in the big, beautiful bill, to make people wealthy by investing in the real economy. But he said it's kind of a backdoor way by which Social Security could become obsolete for some people. Why? Because they have a ton of money. And essentially the Democrats seized on that, saying he wants to ban Social Security. All right. That's the type of thing which is going to go on around these ideas during this campaign, because the Democratic Party has nothing. But Trump and the Trump policy and program have to get better people in Congress in 2026 to continue this thing, and also build, in our view, a deep bench of strong candidates behind these ideas. Now, the only way you become respectable in today's political world is by building your own kind of institution which can pull votes and pull voting blocks. And that's what we're setting out to do here. We're going to be adding content to the PAC, but we're going to start with, the fundamental half-page flyer, which we'll be putting up on the PAC, if it's not there already, in the next 24, 48 hours, essentially giving you the ammunition to go out and organize around Trump's economic policies. What are they? What are we trying to do here? They're going to be mischaracterized all over the place, and you really need to understand them. So our first round of activity is going to be a mass education campaign around exactly what Trump is doing to transform the economy, and then we're going to build out from there.
Adam, can you pull up my slideshow? I'll show people the
Yeah.
half-pager. Okay. This is what we've produced. This is page 1 of a half-page flyer, which is already circulating in Michigan. Main Street, not Wall Street. The new Republican Party is rising. And it quotes from President Trump and the platform and J.D. Vance that this is a new Republican Party of workers and peace, not Wall Street and war. The backside of it then gets a little more specific. It contrasts the new Republican Party versus the GOP wing of the Uniparty, tariffs versus free trade, economic nationalism versus globalism. The government is a builder as opposed to, a parasite, protect Social Security, no wars, and so on. So this is going to be on the Promethean PAC website fairly soon. I hope in the next 24 hours. And we're happy to work with organizations or individuals in terms of what we can do collaboratively for you to get copies of this to actually organize with.
Thank you very much, ladies. So yeah, before we move on, just a reminder, this is only for US citizens. We need your support for Promethean PAC. Promethean PAC can actually spend directly on elections. Promethean Action is more of an ideas and advocacy organization. Okay, so I am going to go to the next question. Okay, let me take off this thing here. All right, next question. I have no basic understanding of the Genius Act. I don't think we do either, but I'm going to keep going with the question here. Could you please take some time during next live to explain that? Okay, we can't. We don't. I don't think any of us do. Additionally, okay, but this is the question I think we can talk about a little bit. How does the discussion about a central bank digital currency align with Trump's new economic vision? Is he in favor of a CBDC or not? Thank you for all you do, Claire. Thank you, Claire.
The answer is no. He's not in favor of a CBDC. That's basically the idea that Mark Carney and others from the British Imperium put forward about 3 years ago at Jackson Hole, Wyoming, to essentially completely subdue the United States government. Their idea was you should have the central bankers not only running the Federal Reserve, you should have them running all fiscal policy, i.e. all U.S. budgetary policy also, by having a central bank digital currency, not to mention the surveillance capabilities, which that would actually give the modern British financial empire, to say the least. So no, he is not in favor of that at all.
Susan, you want to say anything?
Nope, that's it.
Yeah, I think, it's funny. I'll just say something. I swear I saw something recently where Trump said he did something where he kind of codified that he doesn't want a central bank digital currency for the United States. So I'm pretty certain that is not part of Trump's agenda. Okay, next one. Thank you so much for what you're doing. What is the significance of the situation that the UK has been conquered by Islam? It's very funny. We had a very similar question that came through today. So what's the significance here of European countries and the United States getting overrun by Islam and mass immigration?
Well, I'll take the first step, and then I think Barbara can probably dive in a little bit more deeply. I want to approach it conceptually because we do get a lot of comments on our YouTube shows, about how can you say Britain is doing this and Britain is doing that. We've been destroyed as a country. We've been overrun and so on. And the simple point that I want to make is from the standpoint of the global elite, from the modern day British Empire, they could care less about the nation of Britain or Ireland or Scotland or anybody else. Their policies are to destroy all nations. Their policies are to immiserate and impoverish all populations, including the ones in the country where they happen to be headquartered. Their only connection to Britain is that it's the headquarters for the City of London and the monarchy and MI6 and so on. They view themselves as a global Leviathan who will use anything, including illegal immigration, to actually destroy the existence of of any national entity and identity. So I would approach it from that conceptual standpoint. I think Barbara's got a little more granular answer.
Yeah, I mean, essentially, look, the policy of the present, UK state has been for open borders, just like all of the UK and just like all of the EU and just like the United States was. The whole idea is that you destroy national and cultural identity by using what essentially is a slave labor policy to both bring people in to do menial work and jobs and to, not assimilate into the culture. If you actually look at the UK, you'll see that about 10% of the present population right now, or it's actually a little bit lower than that, is from all sorts of countries all over the world because of the open immigration policy. A lot of that in the recent period has been driven by the wars in the Middle East and in South Asia. And a lot of it is a conveyor belt to actually bring people in to do labor at very cheap prices, just like the open border policy was here, to suppress the wages of the citizenry. And since these people are desperate and they're not assimilated, remember that in the UK, this is the heritage of colonialism. If you actually look at the figures, most of the people are coming from countries which were part of the old British Empire. So that's also part and parcel of their immigration policy. The stuff around the Pakistanis, that's been a recent surge. But take a look at Pakistan and you'll see why that is. The opposition party in Pakistan is presently in jail, and the country is in a total uproar. And then the third factor you have is the fact that radical Islam was actually fostered by both the US and American intelligence community sponsors to do subversion throughout the Middle East and throughout the world. And that is part and parcel of the problem. So that's what I would say.
Thank you very much, Barbara and Susan. Yeah, just broadly, for me, this immigration is part of the project of globalization to remove national borders, to build a one world language. So I think this is just a continuation of that policy, and just the liberals have gotten super crazy over the last 2 decades. We're very lucky to have a president like Trump here who's really fixing the immigration problem here in the United States. All right, let's go to the next question because we have a lot more. Okay, here's a quick one we can maybe knock out quick. In the past, Rubio of Florida's chicken hawk sided with the neocons. Is he again leaning toward the neocons? Thank you, Fred.
No. Basically he's changed, and he's changed a lot because he's become an advocate of Catholic social theory, which he's studied extensively. And he's also very much operating on behalf of Donald Trump at this point. He's not exercising some independent neocon theory, which has gone on previously. Just look at what he's done. He's basically fired, 15% of the current State Department personnel. He's defunded the Institute for Peace, which is a regime change operation. He's defunded USAID, which is a regime change operation, both of which were set up by the neocons and used in that way since most recently the Reagan administration in 1983. So he's turning things around. It's the Congress where we still have a massive problem. For example, the Congress just passed out, the Office of Management and Budget at Rubio's suggestion had defunded the National Endowment for Democracy, which is the other CIA regime change operation in the world. Congress just put that funding back in, or wants to put that funding back in. So I think that he has changed, and he's not leaning at all towards the neocons.
Yeah, and I just add, I think it's important when you're looking at people to actually look at them. You look at somebody like Rubio, or another extraordinary example is J.D. Vance. because they are both on record publicly having re-examined their previous axioms. And they've put it out there. I mean, JD has done some amazing interviews, including his conversion to Catholicism, but also his transformation to becoming a Trump supporter. And you can, they're actually making their thought processes public for you to see that, like any serious human being and leader, you can re-examine your underlying axioms. And that's the key. You know, it's not just a question of flipping from this position to that position because it's more pragmatic. There's plenty of that going on out there. But people who actually say, well, why did I think what I thought? And was I right? And with a couple of these people like Rubio and certainly with JD Vance, you can see how their thought processes unfolded. And of course, I add one other thing. Would this have happened unless you had a Donald Trump out there taking the fire for everybody? He's created, in a sense, a safe space for people to think again and to rethink.
Thank you, Susan. Before I continue here, I forgot to bring this up. So I'm giving everyone who's watching the show right now 10% off our merch store. So if you want to get a t-shirt like this one, I also have another Einstein Stay Creative Design, 10% off our entire merch store. You can see the link there, prom.ac/YT10, or scan the QR code. Okay, so let's go to the next question here. Okay. The Imperial Fed question. All right, this is a more serious question about the Fed, which I think this person is asking some serious questions. A question. Let's say we, America, takes this direction. We dump Powell, transform the Fed into a national credit institution, and launch the greatest economic boom in American history under President Trump's revival of the American system. Then how can we be assured we'll be any better at managing the money than the existing Fed? What would be the operating guidelines requirements? Who would be responsible? What would the decision-making oversight look like? What would the oversight process look like? Who would this entity report to? How can this be implemented to last ethically, morally in this country for eons when the country shows no inclination to stop the current political pendulum? Would the national credit institution be implemented to be able to seamlessly move with the ever-changing political environment? Until these questions are addressed, there's no way I could rationally support it. Thank you, Sharon, for your question.
Susan, you want to start?
Well, I'll say I agree with Sharon. You know, and it kind of goes back to the question of, are we going to abolish the Fed? Because we need to have a very, very serious discussion in terms of how do you apply the principles of national banking, which are embedded in our Constitution. Alexander Hamilton gave us a national bank. We have the first and second national bank, which did operate constitutionally under the oversight of the Congress under Article 1, Section 8. When Abraham Lincoln revived the principle of national banking, he did not create a national bank. He created a national banking system. And of course, all of that was undone by or began to be undone by the creation of the Fed in 1913. In a certain sense, you know, the productive role of banks in the United States had the final stake in the heart with the deregulation of banks and the repeal of Glass-Steagall in the 1980s and the 1990s. So the question you're really asking, which is an absolutely legitimate question, and I think is going to take some of the best minds on this planet, minds who actually understand the American system of political economy, is what does national banking look like in the 21st century? And I would certainly be lying if I told you what it actually looked like. So I think you raise extremely important questions, and I think that should dominate our economic discussions over the coming years ahead. Barbara?
Yeah, I think this question really goes back to, some fundamentals about the nature of human beings, which is really the fight between the British Empire and the American system. The American system says economics are really driven by human creativity, what makes us not beasts. And, every great, economic revival in human history has been led by huge technological and scientific advances. Basically what Trump is trying to do right now, I believe, is how do you get money into what he calls the productive side of the economy. Now, some people say, well, how do you therefore pick winners? And that's a difficult question because you've got to actually understand some economic history in terms of what has worked in the past. And we know generally, as a general rule, that when you give credit to productive enterprise at higher and higher levels of technology, that's when an economy prospers because your labor force is prospering at the same time. That's why making the working class the center of this economic revival here is so revolutionary. Our previous administrations made the technocrats and the professionals who administered for Wall Street and the City of London the key nodal point of their vision of the economy. What Trump is saying is, no, I want to support the productivity and raise the productivity of the working class, and I want them to have wages sufficient to form families, and I want them to actually be advancing in their knowledge of how the world works. So, generally we know from history that's where it works to actually put your credit. But how that works right now without collapsing the mess we're in is the question Donald Trump asked Scott Bessent. He said, how do I do this without collapsing the economy given the fragile place that Wall Street, the City of London, and every place else have put the country? So Susan's right. It's a big debate. It's a big question. But we know certain things which are at the center of it, which is obviously people first, not banks first. So that's where I would answer the question.
Thank you very much, Barbara. Okay, let's knock out the next one here. Our national debt of trillions of dollars. Who do we pay the debt to? Who pays the debt? How do they do this? How does this affect the day-to-day lives of the American people? What do we need to do to change this picture of us being in trillions of dollars of debt as a nation? And this is from a long-term supporter named Doris, which I'm sure you ladies are familiar with. Thank you, Doris, for your question.
Susan, you want to take that first, or should I?
Well, I'll take a stab at it. I mean, I think the administration, I'll take a stab at some of it. I think the administration, Bessent, Lutnick, JD, all of them have been very clear that what has been missing for a very long time is the idea of building your way, growing your way out of the debt. I mean, obviously, we've seen Doge and we've seen cuts of idiotic stuff, and anything which is idiotic or destructive should be cut from the federal budget as a way of reducing the deficit. But as Alexander Hamilton was faced with when he came in as Treasury Secretary, we had gone into debt in order to finance the American Revolution. And as a matter of fact, a lot of our debt was actually bought up and held by the British. And you had some people saying to Hamilton, well, you should just, repudiate the debt. Why, and he said, no, we would lose our status as any serious nation if they did that. And he actually devised various policies by which he convinced the holders of that debt to invest in the national bank. And the national bank was acting on behalf of the interests of the nation. Basically, he said, you can exchange your debt for national bank stock. It may take us 10, 15 years to pay you back, but you're going to get paid back, and there's no guarantee otherwise. And then he used those funds to actually finance the industrial growth of the United States. Something like that. It's clear that's how this administration is thinking. They keep referring to Hamilton. I'm sure they've done more than read his report on manufacturers, which Ambassador Jameson Greer referred to the other day in a speech in Detroit. I am sure they have read his report on public debt and on national banking. So I think they have an idea of using those principles in that way. So I'll leave it there and let Barbara take it.
Yeah, I'll just add one thing. The debt basically comes from, how the government is actually financed, and the activities of the Federal Reserve. If you look at the overhang of, the debt, we have a lot which was fueled by the situation in 2008, where we're still bailing out Wall Street and the City of London banks on the backs of the American people. And, as opposed to a lot of stuff that's very active on the internet, the debt is not primarily owed to foreign countries. About 10% of the current debt is actually owned by foreign countries in the form of treasury bonds. All right. So essentially what happens is the government goes out and sells treasuries to finance what the government says it's got to raise at any given point. And the debt has increased drastically due to the Biden administration's policies in terms of the Green New Deal and all that other nonsense, and also the Fed's bailout activities of the Wall Street banks several times from 2008 forward. And that's the component of it. You can't just sort of, will it away, although some people would like to do that. And Trump's entire vision is, look, I can bring in more revenues to pay it down than the current debt by actually doing two things. One is getting investments from abroad. And the second, which he's doing, through tariffs and through basically people just coming in and investing. And second, by raising the productivity overall in a new industrial renaissance through the American people. So everybody has more money to actually pay towards taxes and other things. So that's basically the strategy he's using.
Thank you, Barbara and Susan. All right, we're about halfway through the questions. We're going to run a little bit over. I want to get through them because we already have a backlog more questions. I think we should at least finish the ones that we put together for the show. Okay, here's the next one. So we might want to go through these a little bit faster, but everyone's going to like this one. I keep hearing about how Netanyahu has been controlling President Trump. Can you please explain what role Israel and in particular Bibi Netanyahu have been playing in the United States, the Middle East, and in the Western world? I have my suspicions, but I've never found anyone explaining the full picture and background that I only seem to get from you in a way that makes total sense. Thank you for all your work and dedication, and thank you, Nora, for the question. Barbara and Susan?
Barbara.
Yeah, I'll take it. Look, what you require for understanding the Middle East is not X or Twitter or any of the social media stuff that goes around to the effect that, Netanyahu is some, huge person who's controlling all U.S. policy and, and Israel policy, and an Israeli lobby controls all U.S. policy. There is a substantial Israeli lobby. I'm not disputing that, but the power they hold is literally the power of survival in their view for the state of Israel. And you've got to actually go back and look at what happened through the British Empire's control of the Middle East, starting way, way back in 1870 or earlier. And what you're going to see there is that both radical Islam, opposing and violently opposing the state of Israel and saying that it was going to overthrow it from its inception. The original Grand Mufti of Jerusalem, appointed by the British, was an overt Nazi. All right, think about that in terms of looking at somebody who's running the Muslims and you're a Jew sitting in Palestine. The revisionist Zionism, which Bibi Netanyahu practices, was invented directly by Lord Avery and Lord Milner for purposes of conquest in the Middle East through Jabotinsky, who Netanyahu's father was the private secretary for. That's very different than Zionism, which is much more in a traditional humanist type of situation. So their idea was, we want permanent warfare in this region so that we can get the oil and other riches out of it, and we can have a land route to our colonies in South Asia, namely India and every place else. And by setting off religious warfare, you create a situation which we know from history is horribly difficult to stop. As Trump keeps saying, these two sides hate each other virulently. They would rather keep shooting at each other than coming towards any kind of peace. So it's a very complicated and difficult situation. Trump has sought to outflank Bibi. If anyone wants to read it, I think you should read the book by Barack Ravid called Trump's Peace, which will explain to you the Abraham Accords and what Trump has made to make himself more popular in Israel than Bibi and a lot of the other people, so that he has the possibility of flanking the situation. But you won't find anyone in Israel, because the people are afraid, have rockets blowing up in their yards all the time. You know, you won't find anybody in Israel who's opposing getting rid of Hamas. All right, that's just a fact on the ground of life. Are they upset about the fact that Hamas is using the Palestinian people as a shield, and that Netanyahu and the Israelis have pauperized that entire population? Yes. But is there a simple solution by saying, okay, Bibi Netanyahu is the fascist here versus what Hamas might represent, which is the Muslim Brotherhood? No, you have two warring sides, and you've got to find a peace, which Trump is trying very, very hard to get done. And it's a very complicated political equation. So there's no easy answer for you. Bibi Netanyahu is not controlling Donald Trump. Just read Barack Ravid's book, Trump's Peace, about the Abraham Accords, and you'll begin to understand the very complex dynamics that Trump is actually dealing with here. In the recent period, he's obviously distancing himself from Bibi, because Bibi, in the political situation in Israel, given the settlers movement, which is again a whole bunch of very, very radical revisionist Zionists, can't keep his government together unless he placates them in some sense. So it's a very awful, awful situation. But the other book I'd recommend you read is Friedrich Schiller's History of the 30 Years' War, and you'll begin to understand the horrible, horrible dynamics that happen once you set off a religious war.
Susan, you want to say anything?
No, I think that's more than sufficient.
Okay, next question. Okay. Free markets are distinct from the British mercantile, socialist, communist, fascist hybrid. Our colonial roots, our frontier homestead reality has always emphasized the individual and freedom. We are a nation of immigrants fleeing from bad places to a land of opportunity. The free market test is simple. Is the market controlled by the individual or by government? Today's behemoth government, high taxes, funny money, and crony corporate capitalism compromise our goal of a free market in the U.S., a goal of a free market. Tariffs are okay per the U.S. Constitution, and don't compromise a free market in the U.S. David. Thank you, David, for the questions. Barbara and Susan?
Susan, I'm going to let you start on that one.
All right. Well, look, I think the critical question in his question is, where should it be the case that markets are the ultimate arbiter of what you're doing? It's sort of like property. People say, you probably heard, some people think that our founding documents say life, liberty, and property. Well, that actually was the constitution of the slaveocracy of South Carolina before the American Revolution. We say life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. So the first question really is, what is the principle by which you want to organize your economy? Is it markets? Is it money? Or is there a different principle? And again, this is where you go back to, the question starts, I think, from the wrong premise. And what has been missing from our economic debate for, frankly, most of the last 120 20 years or so, really since the assassination of McKinley, is what are the principles under which you do organize your economy? What is it you're trying to maximize? Are you trying to maximize the amount of money you have? Are you trying to maximize the amount of stuff you have? Or are you trying to constantly increase the ability of man to exert greater dominion over nature? That's the essence of human economics. What differentiates us from the beasts is they can't change their relationship to nature. The carrying capacity of cows is the same if the cows are left to themselves. But if human beings intervene and actually figure out how to create better conditions for more cows to exist on a given land area, or pigs or whatever, then the carrying capacity increases because of the intervention of man's mind. Discovering always less imperfectly, how does this universe work? Taking those hypotheses and applying them, the universe answers either you're right or you're wrong. I mean, to me, this is one of the tragedies about Elon Musk. He's got this crazy libertarian philosophy, but the way he runs SpaceX is not libertarian. He knows there are universal principles. So he launches a super heavy booster. It blows up, spends a lot of money doing that. And he says, oh, okay, I didn't quite have it right. Let's learn from that experience. Let's adjust what we're doing, given what nature just told us. And let's launch another super heavy booster, which probably will blow up. But then they learn something new. I mean, this is how Henry Ford, put the world on wheels and so on. That is the principle around which you organize your economy. Now, do you want to give people maximum freedom in terms of free enterprise and so on to go out and try those things, to have the opportunity to be able to raise the capital, to go out and try and do something new? Yes, you do. So what the question of economics is it's just never spoken of in the right terms. The question of economics is, we're living in a universe of universal principles. The Creator has given us the capability to unpack those principles, discover those principles. And how do you actually create a society and an economy where our ability to constantly do that better happens? So yes, freedom is important, but it has to be bounded by universal principles. And that's not just free to choose or free to do anything you damn well please. It has to be bounded by universal principles. And that was the great breakthrough of Alexander Hamilton's American system.
I think that takes care of it from my standpoint.
Yeah, I think the word free is probably one of the worst languages in the English language, because whenever you hear the word free, literally in any circumstance, it's going to be too good to be true. There's some angle of that. You're getting taken for a ride. And I do personally understand where you're coming from when you say you want free markets. You want them to be as open as possible, but not open to the point where people are having open air drug sales, on the street. So even free markets have their limits, right? Where it's not so free. So that's my comment on that. All right. So we only have, we have 3 questions left. So let's get to this next one here. We're almost done. Okay. I'm an ex-British soldier. I didn't know until recently about the foreign entity, about the City of London. It is quite shocking to find these things out. So you have a British soldier who didn't even know about the separate entity, the City of London. Most Brits have no idea on this issue now. They are trying to get rid of trial by jury and have cooperation law. Our freedom of speech is also being outlawed, despite what Starmer said. I would like to know, how long has the British Empire ruled the roost? Britain is on a very sad state because of these people. Looking forward to more updates, by the way. I am 70 years old now. I would also like to see Epstein files exposed. Thank you, Mick, for your comment and question. So you guys want to comment on that?
Barbara, you go ahead.
Yeah, just briefly, the City of London, which we get a lot of questions in the chat and off of my broadcast and off of Susan's, where people are saying, what's the relationship? You use the word British. What's the relationship to England or the UK? And most people don't have any idea about the City of London, which is this 1 mile enclave within London itself, which is a separate corporation from anything. The king cannot come into the city of London, which is the financial center in London, without asking permission of the Lord Mayor of London. It's a completely separate entity, and it, began its operation once the various empires in history went through kind of historic migrations. They went from Venice to the Netherlands, and then to London through the royal families, and essentially got set up in this form with the banking apparatus for the entire and the British East India Company, a private corporation, by the way, essentially being the rulers of the world, which, actually the state itself was subservient to this entity, this huge financial entity sitting on top of the state. Some people get very confused. They say it's the government. Well, look what's behind the government. The government, in many respects, simply serves this empire still, which functions through Wall Street and the City of London and central banks throughout the world. Regarding the Epstein files, that's a whole separate subject. My own view on that is that it's in part a diversion, which people have been, hooked up to obscure what Tulsi Gabbard and others are actually revealing about the deep state. And what I would like to see, if anything, in the Epstein files is some understanding of his connection to various intelligence agencies. I think his sexual exploits have been more than explored in his criminal trials. And a lot of the stuff that's going on around this is kind of pretty fraudulent and designed to essentially get people wigged out and very upset about something which, the real shocking side of this is his connections to intelligence services, if they exist in the form that most people imagine. I think that's something that has to be asked.
Yeah, and I'll just briefly answer, how long has the so-called British Empire ruled the roost? It's been a battle. I mean, the challenge to the British Empire was the American Revolution and the establishment of the American Constitutional Republic. And whenever we have functioned on the basis of our principles, under a Washington, under a John Quincy Adams, a Lincoln, a McKinley, a Roosevelt, very briefly under John Kennedy, now under Donald Trump, we actually challenged that empire in terms of what form of government is going to rule the world, sovereign nations or this criminal imperial entity. So it's been around for a long time. But once the United States emerged, there was finally a challenge. And, other countries like Russia have often also been a challenge to it. But that's really the battle before us that we think needs to be finally resolved.
Thank you very much. Okay, coming into the final questions here. Okay, I'm relatively new to your channel and your ideas. I've only been watching a couple weeks now, but I can't help but notice there has been no mention of Israel. Okay, we're taking another one of these just because people keep bringing it up in the chat too. Would you make a compelling case about the British, but where do the Zionists fit into your worldview? Thank you, Rick.
I think I partially answered that before. Adam is probably going to put up, I pulled an excellent piece from the EIR magazine from years back, which
I'm going to drop it in the chat.
Yeah,
I'm going to put the link in the chat for now.
Which actually goes through in some depth the entire history of the Zionist movement, the revisionist Zionist movement. I should qualify that. From the standpoint of the British strategic policy in the entire Middle East. As I said before, they control both sides of this religious warfare through the revisionist Zionists, a certain framework within Israel, and particularly Netanyahu, through the Muslim Brotherhood and other British operations in the Muslim world towards radical Islam. They control that side of the equation. And they have switched sides at various points in this battle. The state of Israel, for example, which most people forget, was founded by a war with the British. Basically, Israel had to fight for the Jews in Israel had to fight for Palestine to seize it from the British mandate. So if you look at people like Menachem Begin or other people in the kind of history of Israel, you'll see that they started out in terrorist operations against the British controllers of the state. So again, this is a complicated story, but mostly what it involves is the idea that if I can control people through religious warfare, and I can control both sides of the religious viewpoints in that war, I've got a recipe, if you will, for maximum damage to all populations involved for a long period of time, while I proceed to actually loot the entire area for the resources I want from it, which in the old world was oil and the routes, the land routes into the other colonies in the British Empire, particularly India and South Asia. So that's where I would say the story lies, and most people want to make it a connecto, and it just doesn't work that way.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's a very nuanced question. Susan, you want to say anything before we get to a final question?
Move on.
Okay. I just want to say thank you, everyone. If you're just tuning in now, my name's Adam. I'm the webmaster and video editor for Promethean Action. This has been our first live question and answer show. Thank you, everyone, for tuning in. We're going to be getting into our last question here, which I think some of you will like and chuckle at. We'll see what Barbara has to say. All right. So for the last question, who killed Seth Rich, the DNC tech guy, and why? Henry, thank you for your question. It made me chuckle. It made these people, everyone's laughing. So, Barbara, do you want to say anything?
I don't know the answer to that question, and I also don't wish to get sued right now, which is essentially the way this entire story has evolved. Essentially what happened is there were a lot of questions caused by Julian Assange, essentially saying that he offered a reward for Seth Rich to solve the crime of who murdered Seth Rich, the DNC, computer programmer, tech guy, who Assange clearly implied was somehow the source of the WikiLeaks files, which got released on Hillary Clinton. So that set off a whole chain of events. He was killed in a robbery. It was definitely covered up and held very closely by the FBI. And everybody has been speculating about that for years. Anybody who said anything about it, including Seymour Hersh, ended up getting sued by the people who had some stake in not really telling the full story of what happened here. And I don't know. Could it have been a robbery? Obviously, DC is just like that, and it appears to have been set up like a robbery. What happened to his computer? We don't know yet. Hopefully, that will be one of the things that will be released and gone into in the whole disclosures which people are doing. Will that tell us anything about whether he was the guy who downloaded those files and gave them to WikiLeaks? I don't know if there's a trail like that or not. So that's where I would leave the answer.
Adam, you're muted.
Yeah. Thank you very much, everyone, for coming to our first live question and answer session. I have some people that are mad because they're upset because we were getting just so many questions. Some people put questions in the super chat. Carol, I see your comment there. Please, please email me. I sent you my email address. Please email me. We will get your question answered. We plan on doing this once a week, every Thursday. So make sure you're subscribed to our email newsletter. You can do a Google search for Promethean Action or any other search engine. and you will find us, and just get our free newsletter, and you'll get updates about when we do this show live, and our 3 political briefings that we do a week, along with other articles and link. Okay, I'm gonna put it up on the screen now. Get our free newsletter. You can go to prom.ac. Barbara and Susan, do you have any final comments before we sign off for today?
No, I just really enjoyed answering people's questions, and hopefully we provided some things which you hadn't really thought about before. And that's part and parcel of what we're trying to do here.
Yeah, and I would just say the most important thing people can do is actually organize. You know, that's, first of all, that's how you find out what you don't know. When you get out there in the political hubbub, you also find out what people are thinking about and what's real. Because I hope what we're bringing into this fight is a grounding in something other than screaming headlines and, you know, the latest internet phenomenon and so on. This is a long-term historical battle. It's embedded in the question of universal principles. And I think we're in an incredible position in history at this point, as long as people are very, very serious about where we are and what we have to do.
All right. Thank you, everyone. Subscribe to our free newsletter, and see you next week.